speaker series evening. Glad to have you all here tonight. As many of you who've been following our progress the last year or so know that the last winter we celebrated the return of the original woodwork from the Brooklyn Museum, and we deinstalled the reproduction woodwork that had been put in the late 60s and early 70s. And now through this summer, we've done sort of the housekeeping work and electrical and plumbing and a lot of sort of fix-ups that needed, but also a lot of mysteries were solved. And tonight we're going to hear about those mysteries and in a Repairs for Penelope talk from Andrew Owenby of Andrew Owenby Restorations. Following the presentation, we'd like to invite you over to the Cupola House for refreshments and a sort of a show and tell because the walls are completely gone. If you haven't been in there recently, there's just lathe and studs. So we invite you up to that. In the meantime, please turn off your mobile phones and welcome Andrew.
Thanks everybody for coming out again to hear me running my mouth about the same house. That's kind of neat. Y'all keep coming back to hear more. But yeah, I do appreciate all the support and all the interest, especially for the last 6-8 months. We've had a lot of interesting stuff going on, and now I'm going to catch you up now. I'm just going to give you a little update, but at the end of the presentation, I'll have some slides that show what we have accomplished in the last few weeks. It's nothing major, it's just kind of normal work, but it's been interesting. So I'll discuss that at the end, but now I'd like to let you know where we are within the phase, and then we'll kind of circle back to that. The last time you were here, we were talking about, the discussion was called Corbin's Doors, discovering Corbin's Doors, or opening Corbin's Doors, that was it. And the focus was some of the interior changes that we had discovered. As we were pulling out the woodwork, we found doors and changes and all that. So tonight's focus is going to be on the exterior, a lot on the exterior. There's some overlap with the interior, but it's mainly answering one question: why does the house look like it does now? That's a 1915 to 18 photograph, but that's basically what the house looks like now when you walk outside, right? Did it begin that way? And if not, how do we know why? Why are we asking all these questions, and why are we even talking about it? So that's the discussion tonight, is going to be repairs for Penelope. And so we're going to jump ahead. We're going to skip a little bit ahead in time to the 19th century and the Cupola House in the 19th century. And how do we know that it didn't look like this in 1758 when it began life? Anytime you're looking at a building, and I got a couple of guys in the room that are much better at this than me, so I have to be very careful how I say what I say, because they will call me out. Two of my mentors are in the room. So when we walk up to the Cupola House, and trust me, this did not begin this year. These things began before I was born, I will say that. So in the 80s, and one of the most prominent writings about the Cupola House was written in 1980, before I came around. So the study of this house is nothing new. The questions about this house are not new. We have raised some new questions like we knew we were going to, but this list describes the key things that we have, that we know are facts. There are some changes that have been made. Those facts have come to light through other repairs and studies. A lot of things have brought us to where we are today. To jump to it, the physical evidence of exterior changes comes from the knowledge that we have of beaded siding that is not first period. It is not first period because it's held on with cut nails throughout. All of the exterior of the house is cut nail. Cut nails come around about 1800. Just before 1800, they're basically invented, and then they show up in Edenton in the mid to late 1790s. So the siding, we know that's not original that you see now. Extensive repairs to the framework. Once we pulled that siding, we realized extensive repairs to the framework only have one generation of nails on the framework repairs. So that associates the framework with the siding. The original frame, we'll see in a minute, has some other evidence to prove some other things were going on. Late Federal style woodwork, where the changes were made. So anytime that woodwork was added, it was added in a pretty narrow window of time, which puts it about 1815 to 25, maybe even 30. The rear chimney, which would be the northwest corner of the house facing west, is the 3-to-1 bond. It has first period Rumford style fireboxes. We'll get into that. Its fireboxes are natural to the chimney. They've not been altered. So they're a new style firebox compared to the rest. And then clear evidence was found that the framework had been cut in to accept these chimney pieces, or this chimney piece. And then of course scientific paint analysis, that's concluded so much about this house, but it proves that these federal woodwork elements are much later than the early, based on the composition of the paint. And a key word that you'll hear me talk about again later is going to be chrome yellow. So make a note of that. Chrome yellow is very, very important in the Kupel House study. And then of course the front porch was added, and we'll talk about the salvage parts that was covered in that addition. And then rusticated siding, that's another really key term. It's been talked about for a long time, and these discoveries were done long ago, long before I came into the picture. So these are not new discoveries, particularly the rusticated siding. But it's been interesting to find more of it. We knew it was there. They had found it in the 80s and then early 90s, and then they had to wait. Don Jordan had to wait very patiently for about 25 or 30 years or whatever it was to actually see it when they pulled the roof off, because he knew it was there, and then they found the bits and pieces. So that's the list of why we're here today to talk. We know these are facts. These are obvious changes that we've seen. The 19th century chimney, which is again the rear chimney, the only rear chimney on the house, by the way. What does it tell us? Well, from the outside, it is a 3-to-1 bond, and if you look at this photograph, and I could just spend the next 45 minutes and just open the door of brickwork, the world of brickwork, and not even touch the tip of that. It's such an extensive thing, so we're not going to get stuck on it. It has a different bond. The way the bricks are laid is very different from the earlier chimneys adjacent to it. Again, its fireboxes are Rumfords. We'll talk about Mr. Rumford in a minute. Federal style mantle. So all the woodwork that relates to the chimney on the rear of the house is all federal in style, and scientific analysis has proven that it all has chrome yellow. Chrome yellow is not invented. There's a little bit of a window of when it was invented. We don't really know, but it does not become readily available until probably the late 18 teens. Say, push the bounds like 1820, and in a place like Edenton, are they at that cutting edge to get it that early? So you will not see it basically before 1820. These are the two fire pieces, the mantle pieces and the fireboxes on that chimney. The left is the downstairs, the right is the upstairs. These fireboxes are considered up to date and new cutting edge. They associate that chimney with a later period, along with their paint analysis that was completed on the left, which is the downstairs again. Its first period paint was a coat that included chrome yellow. So it physically, unless it was put in and not painted, which is probably not the case, its first period paint application included chrome yellow. So that puts it in that 1820 window automatically. The same with the upstairs. So let's talk about Rumford, and then I'll tell you who he is and how he got there. It's not just something interesting to say. The Rumford style, if you just notice, these two photographs are actually, the one on the right is the interpretation that was at Brooklyn of the dining room fireplace, and the one on the left is the actual dining room fireplace. It's been Rumfordized and then unrumfordized. So what you see now is actually its early configuration. But we'll talk about it in a minute. Go back to that. So I sound like I might be going in circles, but there's a lot of circles going on at the Kupel House right now. Sir Benjamin Thompson, the Count of Rumford, that's where the name Rumford comes from. He was a very important military strategist, and he was a scientist, and he was actually born in America. He's got a whole background if you want to go down that rabbit trail. Most importantly for us tonight, he designed the style fireboxes he's most famous for inventing. A little bit of dispute over whether he actually did all of it or not, but basically he sort of patented, if you will. He really made the most efficient version of the style firebox that we're discussing. And that happened in the 1790s. So if you see a Rumford firebox and it's original to a chimney, it's probably a later chimney. Now you will see these sort of canted corners coming in and people playing around with more efficient fireplaces in the 18th century. It doesn't mean that it can't be earlier, but when you see what we're seeing in the house, it certainly lines up. What's a Rumford firebox now that we know who Mr. Rumford is? The top basically looks like what the Cupola House original fireboxes look like, both upstairs and down, and the two chimneys up front of those. They were straight-sided for the most part. There is one caveat to that. There's always a lot of caveats at the Cupola House. There's a lot of that, but basically they're straight-sided. They are not Rumfords, we'll just put it that way. And they have these interesting things that's not depicted in this photograph. They have what we call smoke channels. They have all these old-fashioned features for fireboxes. And then all of a sudden, this new chimney comes in play, and it has the photograph at the bottom. It has canted corners. It has a canted back. These features they actually do a few different things, but one, they throw all the heat into the room. They project the heat into the room, but they also reduce turbulence, and it allows for smoke to go quickly and smoothly, basically, up the smoke channel and out the chimney. It creates a narrow outlet at the top of the firebox, and the space above it is larger, and so it creates a draft, a tight draft right there. It's fast moving air, and it just sucks the smoke right out. Whereas on the box above, now this is a vertical view looking down on it, by the way, you could also have, in the early period, you tend to have higher lintel heights. And so there's a lot of turbulence. The smoke can come up and kind of do what it wants to do, and then go up. The photograph on the right kind of contradicts what I just said about straight sides. This is the parlor of the Cupola House. This has a curved back. The one on the left is actually the dining room opposite of it. But if you notice, see the V shape in the bricks? I don't have my laser pointer tonight, which I wish I had. See the V shape in the bricks on the left? These are the pavers in the bottom. They're actually left over from when it was Rumfordized. That gives you the profile of the Rumford firebox. They just, when they took it out, they didn't take those out. So that's actually perfect evidence of that Rumford style, that narrowed up small, much smaller firebox. And then, excuse me, in the back you'll see later iron fireback, and behind that is a smoke channel. I'm gonna step up here a point. See this area right in here is a smoke channel. So this is sort of set back. Now they could have accepted a herringbone or something in the back that may have been dry laid. There's a lot of opportunities for that, but we don't have any evidence of it. So this is all pre-Rumford. And then the evidence of the Rumford in the bottom of that firebox on the left, which is again the dining room firebox. The parlor's firebox, when it was narrowed up, the evidence is gone for how it was handled. What did they do to Rumfordize it? They narrowed it up. We know that because the original mantle, this gets confusing, so follow me. The photograph on the left is the replica woodwork we removed last year in the house in the original fireplace. They backdated that's one of the few things they did to actually backdate the woodwork and got it correct. They put the arch back, they opened the firebox up to its full-size original configuration. The photograph on the right is the original woodwork in Brooklyn with a smaller fireplace, because that's what it looked like when they removed it. Now, there are photographs of this in situ in 1918, but that's just all kind of blocked off, and there's a wood heater in the way, and you can't see what's going on. But if you notice this panel, this firebox is square, and this panel has been added to this chimney piece. So when we look at the back, we can see clearly it was added. So this drops, again, the lintel height here to allow for the Rumford style firebox to be functional. So clear evidence of a change. you begin to ask when you see these things, you cannot look at these things as little islands of change. These chimney pieces are all beginning to look the same as the new chimney. So it starts to lead you down a path of, okay, when did all this happen? Did it all happen at once? I can tell you why they did it, because they wanted a warmer house. Yeah, it's that simple. And they were able to accomplish it through the new technology of a Rumford style fireplace. Now, you have to talk about the addition of a chimney, and then you back up and say, well, why would you not have a chimney on those rooms? Well, it doesn't necessarily mean they were or were not anything. I'll give you a good example. In Edenton, in 1778, after the death of Miss Elizabeth Wallace, her house was put up for sale. Her house apparently, from what we understand in this document, probably was the house to the right of the courthouse, facing the courthouse. You have Horny Blows Tavern was on the left. This is not described as that. And this was nigh to the courthouse. There was nothing in front of the courthouse. We know that from the Saltine map. So more than likely, this was one of the houses to the right facing it. But highlighted in yellow, it says the dwelling house, it has 4 rooms at the bottom, 3 of which have fireplaces, and 6 bed chambers above, wherein are 2 fireplaces. So she's describing a house with 4 unheated bedrooms on the second floor. 4. In their own words, in the period. So because we don't see a fireplace in a chamber doesn't mean it wasn't a bed chamber, doesn't mean it was a bed chamber. It may or may not define the use of that space. If you see a fireplace, it might help you understand it could be a bed chamber, vice versa. So we have to understand that when we look at that, if we don't see a fireplace in there and we don't, well, may have been a bed chamber. It must not have been Mr. Corbin's bed chamber, probably. So all that said, this is Edenton in just a slightly later period than the build of the house, but prior to the changes that were added to the house. So as we move into the future discussions and studies of the house, we have to keep this kind of thing in mind, that in the period, they just perceive things a lot differently than we probably do today. So what evidence besides cut nails, so we know that the siding was replaced because of the cut nails, namely. So if you remove that siding, what was there? Why does all this siding have cut nails? Did they pull beaded siding off, which was seen extensively in the 18th century, and then just replace it? Was it bad? You start asking all these questions. Years ago, they discovered evidence of rusticated siding reused in the house, and we will talk about that in a minute. But when you remove the siding, what was there? If you don't know anything about the rusticated siding, you don't know, what was it? Well, a few weeks ago, we had to do some repairs on the back of the house, just above this rear first floor door, and that's the window above in the stair hall at the landing of the stairs. And where the tape is on the right in this area here, we had to do some repairs. So we pulled more siding than we needed to. The Cupola House Association decided before we got into this phase of work that they wanted to continue the investigation of the siding and let it overlap with the work we were doing, because they knew we were going to need to pull siding, so we decided to pull some more. So what we were able to do in this photograph, and it was kind of the solution that worked the best, and it didn't show up well in the photograph on the slide, so I put these arrows in. But we used zip ties, colored zip ties to put in the holes, so you have 2 generations of nails. You have the nails of the siding that's come off. Those were obvious. And then you had earlier nail patterns that we were able to lay out and map using this technique of color coding. And we were only able to find 2 generations of nails. The earlier generations of nails spaced pretty evenly on the back, about 13 inches apart. You had pairs of nails 3 inches apart or so at the 13-inch interval. And so there's a red string at every interval of paired nails. So that earlier siding was wider, and you're not going to see 13-inch wide beaded lap siding. Have you ever seen 13? I've never seen. I've seen 10-inch, but I've never seen anything that wide. So immediately you say, well, it was probably something flush and wide. You have some options. Had we never found in the past evidence of rusticated siding, and if it wasn't on the cupola, we would never even consider it. Because Edenton can lay claim to the only rusticated sided building of any manner in the state of North Carolina, as far as I know. And there are only one or two. One in Virginia is this little house called Mount Vernon, and then there's one in Charleston, and then a few up. You get into New England, you start seeing. So it's a very, very rare application, and I'm going to hold you in suspense until I describe what it is. But nonetheless, on the back, we were just seeing what was there. What does the evidence tell us? So here's the nail space, 13 inches. It doesn't tell us any more than that, though. One of the first things I learned about the cupola house when I talked to Mr. Don Jordan was they found rusticated siding. I thought, wow, that's wild. Where'd you find it? Well, it was reused in this cavity above the front porch. So imagine you're looking at the front porch from the front of the house. This is inside the dead space below the roof and above the ceiling. And these are the nailers, these two arrows, the blue and red arrow pointing at nailers, just strips that were split and cut, and that ceiling has an arch, and so they were chopped in an arch and then nailed into the rafters to allow for nailers for lath. So these things have been hidden and undiscovered for a century. And I don't know when, Don, when did you guys first see this? You ran a borescope, but when was that?
It's in the early 80s, I think.
So in the 80s, they ran a borescope, which would have been really high-tech stuff back then.
Yeah.
They drilled a small hole up through the ceiling, and they ran that scope and looked around, and they saw it. Well, Don had to wait till 2018? 12, 13? Like I said, 25 years or whatever it was, before they pulled the roof off to be able to get these photographs. So these photographs were taken during the roof repair. The roof that you see on it now was going on in this photograph. The blue arrow on the right and the red arrow on the left indicate two different types of siding that were reused in the same space. The red arrow on the left is beveled flush sheathing, and it's substantially thick. It's thicker than most I've dealt with. Most of it, I mean, you gave me a whole half a truckload one day, and it was all 5/8 or 3/4 or whatever it was. We pull a lot of it off of the porches. We see this flush sheathing. You see it on outbuildings. You see it used fairly extensively. It is not a lap style siding. The bevel allows for the weatherization of the joint. But on the right is this very rare rusticated siding. So I'm taking you through the timeline in the discovery phase that we have seen. This is the first glimpse of it. And you have to say, well, aha, look at that. So rusticated siding becomes a very important feature to look for. But this doesn't really tell you much. It doesn't tell you how far it was spaced because it's cut in half, and how wide it was. It doesn't tell you how wide the nails were. Now, where do you go from there? Here are all the places that rustication has been found reused. The top left is again in that cavity over the porch. The bottom left is the back of the mantel we talked about last time, or maybe even the first time. It was found on the backside of the parlor mantel when we were in Brooklyn. It was reused to build that mantel. So you got to make a note of that, because that starts to put things in time. If that mantel has chrome yellow in the paint, in which it does, that puts a hard date of about 1820 on that mantel. It cannot be before then. So that tells us that this rusticated siding must have come off before the mantel was built, right? Now, not a big topic of the discussion tonight, but in the lower left photograph, the bottom right corner, you see a vertical white strip right here. Susan Buck was able to get a first period paint analysis, a positive idea, the first period paint analysis of the house right there. And it was the only layer of paint on that rusticated siding. So that was really, really important to find. The top right is a photograph that when we go in the house later, I can show you exactly where this is. It's hard to get a perspective of it, the photograph, but it's basically above and left of the fireplace in the dining room. And it was driven on with these big spikes. It was used to patch an area where some fire damage was, and then later bug damage was repaired. Again, well, I use the corner, remember that? Right in here is a tiny, this arrow kind of disappeared in the colors, but right here is a tiny little edge that is right here just out of the frame. that is the beveled edge of the rusticated siding. And then on the right, again, right in here, this arrow is focused on the zoomed in part. That's the right side. So that's a full panel of rusticated siding. It's about 32 inches long, about like this. So what is rustication? Now that we've seen it, it's kind of like Rumford. Who is this guy? Who is Mr. Rustication? Rustication is basically faux stone. It's stone, it's wood cut to look like stone. It's a term that can be used in a lot of ways. On the left, you'll see the panels that are on the cupola house. They are mimicking stone blocks, just like this shot of the kitchen at Mount Vernon, which has rustication on the front. Interestingly, it does not have it on the sides or the rear. So you begin to say, well, you know what? It doesn't have to be all the way around the house. It is an extremely expensive application. And I mean, Mr. Corbin was wealthy in Eatonton, but was he Mount Vernon wealthy? I don't know. So Mount Vernon has it on the four sides. It's not under the porch. Interestingly, actually no, it does wrap under the porch. It's on all the sides of Mount Vernon, even on its later editions. So, but not on the secondary buildings, only facing the courtyard inward. So here's an application that gives us an idea that we don't have to have rustication all the way around. So we keep going. Here recently we were able to take off more siding, but right here we're back up on the rear facade. This is a zoomed in shot, so give you a better idea of what we were looking for, and that we know what rustication is and what we're dealing with. Here are the red zip ties and yellow zip ties. The yellow is the beaded siding that we took off, and red are the later, is the earlier application spaced. And the double nails gives you an idea that it was something flush. So you're putting a nail at a joint, above and below a joint. Where a lap siding, the nail goes through both pieces, so you typically don't have two nails right there clustered together like we saw this. So when we see those nails spaced out, we know it's a flush sheeting application of some kind. Okay, so now we're going to move around to the front and sides of the house. The left photograph is the southeast corner, which would be the street side. If you're standing over there at downtown Roots eating a sandwich, it'd be the left side, to the left of the chimney, to the front of the house. We're between the window and the corner of the wall, or corner of the building, excuse me. Again, the red arrows indicate the spacing of early siding. Now we're getting into about a 12-inch range, so deviates just a little bit. But interestingly, on the front of the house, we went around and pulled a few courses, and it starts to drop in dimension. It's closer to 9 inches. And it's pretty consistent. There are some wider pieces. This is where our investigation ends, and this is where I'm gonna tell you everything I know about the rustication or not rustication on the cupola house. I'm not here to tell you we know anything more than what's here. This is all the evidence we have. It's a major discussion, and these are really, really important discoveries. But we're left with as many questions as we were able to figure out. So we have to keep going around and keep asking these questions. But on the right, you'll notice there are these, see a distinct difference. So this is just sort of dirt and dust. This is actually paint at these two locations. So it appears that they put a piece of siding up, and then they primed the joint, the lap joint, where the next piece of siding went up. And the rustication is not lapped. If you remember that photograph up inside the porch frame, it has a different joint. It's a true lap joint. This was painted at that interval. Well, the sides and the back have no evidence of that. And there would be no need to prime lap siding, lap joints and siding. But these bevel joints on flush sheeting, there's no need to paint it because it's a very weatherproof application. But the rusticated siding is very susceptible to damage and rot and water intrusion at that joint. So there's a good reason for them to prime it. It appears they did, and at a tighter interval. So that, as we came around the front of the house, we saw that. So Don and I went back around to the back and the sides and started looking for paint evidence, and we didn't find any of this primer evidence. So we're sort of left at that. That's basically where we are with rustication. Now we did look at the corners to see how they're treated. The corner, it did have a corner board application. Something was on the corner. Rustication typically does not have a corner board. I've looked at every rusticated house in America that I can find online. I'll put it that way, it's documented in the period. None of them have corner boards. In fact, the kitchens at Mount, and the secondary buildings at Mount Vernon are the only ones that I found that didn't have rustication on all the sides. And when they did, if you remember the photograph, I can back up if anybody has any questions later, they sort of wrapped the corner with the rustication. That's how they dealt with the corners. At the cupola house, apparently they had corner boards, and you say, well, rustication doesn't use corner boards, right? Well, it does on the cupola house, on the cupola. So now you're sort of going back and forth. Now we're chasing ourselves in a circle here, because immediately we thought, well, it can't be rustication, because it has corner boards. Well, then we looked up and we said, well, the cupola does. So again, 12-inch spacing, see the red circle on the right, it's kind of the same thing over and over again. So basically what we have is a different application on the front than we have on the sides and the back, and we have corner boards. And we have rusticated siding reused, and we have flush sheathing reused. So, what, when, and where, I can't answer that question. I'm here, I'm gonna leave you with all the same questions I have. You're welcome. The bigger question I think we can answer though, and the real premise behind all this discussion tonight, we're in there doing repairs, and we see previous repairs, and we see repairs on top of repairs. So why did they change the siding? If rustication is so expensive and so good looking, why take it off? And if flush sheathing is so good, and why take it off? I didn't have enough slides to show you all the damage that was repaired on this house in the 19th century. Here are 2 slides to give you an idea. The red arrows are indicating a header. This is the back door, this is the window at the stair landing. This section right here is repaired. And it was repaired, the only siding it's ever had are the set of nails we pulled out of it. And those are those cut nails for that beaded siding. All 4 corners have either been repaired heavily or replaced, all 4 corner posts on the building. So you begin to realize and then headers are repaired extensively all around the building. On the northeast corner, on the northwest side, in the parlor, in the dining room, you start seeing all these major repairs of these components. And they all had to take the siding off to accomplish it. So you have to put yourself into the timeline we're getting ready to talk about. If these things happened into the 19th century, you're talking about siding that was, 50, 60, 70 years old. It had probably some of the same problems that the timbers behind it had. The bugs got in. The termites were in this building extensively. And so I think it's clear that we understand why the siding was replaced. It was because a lot of it had to be removed for repairs. And it would have been extremely expensive to put back on. This was probably a mass-produced thing that could get right around the corner. It was cheaper and easier just to put new siding on. And that's what they did apparently. So in the 1st century of the cupola house, here are some important things. These are triggers we look for when we look for changes. So we've seen the physical evidence of change. We know what those changes look like in person. And so now we're sort of getting into the whys and whens. So Francis Corbin builds it in 58. He lives there until 67. His widow's there till 77. Dr. Samuel Dickinson purchases the house in 77. He stays there until his death in 1802. Penelope Barker, Elbeck Orman Dickinson, is the niece, by the way, of Penelope Barker. She stays there until she dies in 1819. Her daughter, Penelope Barker Dickinson, marries Nathaniel Bond in 1809. So Miss Dickinson lives there for about 10 years with her son-in-law and daughter. She dies in 1819. That's an interesting date when you know that chrome yellow is used extensively and it doesn't really show up until about that same time. I won't ask anybody in the room have they ever had their mother-in-law live in the house, and if you were able to change her house while you lived there. I'm not answering that question, but you can see why 1819 kind of matters. 1819 becomes a very important date all of a sudden. It sort of opens the door, proverbial door, to change. She passes in 1819. And then the Dickinsons have 6 children or so by 1830. And by 1833, they're in some pretty serious financial trouble. So there's an extensive list of all the problems they have. And there are also some economic impacts in 1819. There's an economic scare. In the 1820s, early 20s, apparently there's an economic decline in Eatonton. And so you take all those things into account, and then you look at, well, how many people were in the house? Why would they need to put a chimney on? Why would they want to upgrade these rooms? And you'll see from 1810 to 1850, this steady incline within the house, and a pretty steep rise in the 1820s, and by the 1830s and 40s, they got a house full of folks. And so a lot of children at some point in between the 1810 and 20 census, mom-in-law is still there. So again, it starts pointing to the 1820 to 40 window. Now our window's starting to narrow on the bottom end, so we're at 1819, we're probably looking in the 1820s. So Bruce Cheeseman wrote a really fantastic 3-volume book about the Cupola House and did some great research so that guys like me don't have to do it. According to Bruce Cheeseman, they pretty much reached their financial prominence in the early 1820s. That starts to dwindle into the mid 1820s. In 1823, John Wilson Littlejohn and Wilson Cheshire, they file a suit against Bond for a business transaction for $10,000 to resolve a debt on that business. That's a lot of money. The entire estate, the entire Bond estate is leveraged for cash. So they are actually putting everything from the pots and pans to the furniture up for cash to try to float things. And there are a number of, I wish this was not so fuzzy. Sorry about that, because it would be like this, but it is what it is and we'll deal with it, so I'll try to read it. Cheeseman says they managed to survive the financial failings through a series of complex deeds of trust and mortgages with the sister-in-law, Sarah Enoch, and Eatonton's foremost lawyer, Augustus Moore. And then here is this list of all the inventory of the house that they leveraged for cash in 1833. So I have to say that by 1833, they're probably not replacing all the siding and doing all this work that we're talking about on the Cupola House. So we start to see the end sort of the window of opportunity for this to happen. So we're looking at probably 1819 now to by 1833. When did it all end, and why is Penelope Barker so important? Penelope Barker's will in 1866 leaves her son with a financial reimbursement for the work that he's done on her home and the houses around, and then anything to come for maintenance. So she sets him up to be reimbursed for all the work that was done. He's not old enough to have done the work in the 1820s that we think happened. And the federal mantelpieces, remember, they're sort of out of vote. By 1840, they would have been Greek revival. So these federal mantelpieces. So what we think, in conclusion, is that the scientific evidence, the physical evidence, and the archival evidence all show us that there are basically 2 major campaigns of repairs to the Cupola House. And they take part somewhere between 1819 and 1830. And then again in 1855 for 50 to 66. But with that, you can say at the bottom of that slide, I think this is true, that Penelope Barker Bond was the first person to save the Cupola House. You're not the first. She was the first. Because she had a house in pretty bad repair. And she did a lot during her tenure, she and her husband as well, to do that. So I think we owe a debt of gratitude to Miss Penelope Barker Bond for keeping the house alive for us to be able to do it again. It's proof these things are sort of cyclical. Every so often you're going to have to pay to deal with things. There just wasn't enough time to cover a lot of things, so this may be like a part A of maybe a B series is coming, because there's so much more. But I can safely say that I think that the house that you see now, for the most part, there's one thing that didn't, was the Widow's Walk. It's a whole other discussion. We do think that came off later, but basically what you see now Miss Penelope Barker Bond saw that house in that same configuration, well, at least by her death in 1866. I can talk a little bit about our repairs, but do you have any questions about this sort of barrage of timeline and changes and things that we did? Did I spin your heads in too many circles? So, basically, you have a major exterior application, and then you could talk about what we've talked about in the past. Some of these interior federalizations happen probably at the same time. If you've got a brick mason on site building a chimney, and he does a nice job, you're probably going to get him to update those old fireboxes in the moment and say, hey, while you're here, go ahead and Rumfordize those too, because he probably introduced her to Mr. Rumford. So, all that said, I think Miss Penelope Barker is pretty important. Any questions? So the ongoing repairs involve sill repairs. The north wall, which would be the back wall, we did some repairs. I pointed out in the slides along the header. And then there's some central post repairs, and I've got a few slides here in a second to show you. Dining room, ceiling joist, lift. So the dining room was almost 3 inches, had an almost 3-inch belly in it. If you walked upstairs on the second floor, you actually saw it more than you did in the dining room when you were up there when the building was cleaned out. And then the first floor, we did some sill replacements, and then now when you go in, we're in the middle of doing some masonry, some repointing. So we've been mixing slaking lime and making lime mortars for that over the last few days. And then we'll also do some mechanical repairs and updates to HVAC. Wiring is already done, and then a few other minor things. The lift of the ceiling, if you look at the left, there's a big belly in it. It's really hard to see in photographs. It's hard to get a perspective of, but on the right, we jacked it up in a few places. But the photograph on the left tells the tale. This is where the string was on the floor above, from side to side. That's how far out it was at the center. And on the right, we had it up flush, and it sagged back down about maybe a half inch. So I'll take it. I was pretty happy with that. And hopefully it'll stay where it's put. We've got some iron brackets to tie it all together. So that wall did some really interesting things. It pulled out of these mortise pockets. It pulled away. It's hard to describe how out of plumb that house is. And Don, you want to describe how out of plumb that house is? I was going to let you do that.
It's crazy out
It's crazy out of plumb. I'll put it this way: on a 4-foot level, if you walk into the center hall, in fact, as we go over there, I might grab my 4-foot level out of the truck. It bottoms the bubble out on a 4-foot level in the center wall. So it's 2 inches out and 4 feet. So you do the math. Yeah, in 8 feet it goes in. It's really out of plumb, and in that some of the ceiling joists had pulled out of their mortises and allowed the ceiling to drop. So we jacked it up, and in doing that, some things you just can't correct. You know, you'd almost have to take the house apart and fix everything, put it back together, and then what do you have? So you live with it. We jacked it up into place. We put a ledger board, and we had to do it individually. This was the best option, and we tied it together. I don't think it's going to come back down. Maybe. The sill repair that we had to do, we tried to save it, but you can see on the left that oak sill was hollowed all the way through. You can make a canoe out of it now. So it was totally buggy through. It looked beautiful on the backside. The U-Moss was nice, but it looks like a drum. It was hollow. And so as we got in that thing, we got it out. We used some CCA treated material on the right, so hopefully it'll last a few more generations. And then a few discoveries were made, and then I'll wrap it up with this because these are really fun. In the wall voids, as we've been going through, you've heard me in the previous lectures talk about all the things we found in the wall voids, like little teeny beads and all kinds of fun stuff. When we pulled the siding off, so the photograph on the left gives you an idea. The window up in the top right corner is the north and west rear window in the center of that wall. That's the header just below, and then these are plaster keys just piled up in there. And on the right, it's something really interesting. Didn't know exactly what it was at first till we got it out, and I said, oh, look at that. It's probably a Victorian era, maybe late 19th century fan, ladies' fan. It was intact. We were able to open it. It's got a little block print. It's pretty neat. And then on the right, in that same cavity, was an 1826 large sink. So that fell out. maybe some kid, there were a lot of plaster repairs in that one area, kind of concentrated, so somebody's kid just stuffing stuff in there. I don't know. There were pins and buttons. And there was
What
all
date
that.
did you say was on that?
1826.
That was the carpenter put the siding on, said.
Well, you know,
Someday they're gonna know what date.
Interestingly, I can't confirm this because I didn't see it in situ. I walked up and that coin was laying at the foot of the ladder where David that works with me was. And he had just pulled that siding off and a bunch of that stuff fell as he was easing it off. So the siding was holding that coin up. And I'm glad you said it, 'cause I wasn't gonna say it, but 1826 kind of fits right smack in the middle of 1819 and 1830 last time I checked. So could it be that it was stuck in there? Maybe, did it just fall in there? I don't know. Had I seen it trapped behind that siding, then I would agree 100%. But they did do those things. So is it possible? Yes, it's possible. The fact that there were so many other artifacts in that area makes me wonder, is it just something that got stuffed in there later? And it has a little bit of wear to it. Yes.
Can you back it up a slide?
I can.
So where is this fan?
So this fan, if you're, fan, all right, so the fan is
See that
right,
horizontal fence?
it's right here in this photograph.
Okay.
It's kind of in the rubble.
On this side, it's right there.
This is it. As we started pulling the rubble out, we kind of uncovered. We slowed down.
Okay.
When you see a large cent fall out, you kind of slow down a little bit. And so the fan was trapped in that second layer of yes. So there were plaster keys, and then this fan was on top of the plaster keys, and then there was another layer of plaster application that creates sort of a plaster brick, we call it. So wet plaster fell on top of this, on top of dry plaster. So if you think of that from an archaeological standpoint, this sort of strata that you're looking at, it was on top of the earlier rubble. It wasn't all the way at the bottom, but it was in the earlier era of stratigraphy. The fan opened up nice. It was perfectly preserved.
Wow.
So yeah, but lots of little pins and buttons and pieces of thread and all kinds of stuff. And that was the only wall void that had anything like that in it. We looked at all of them. Everything else was just plaster rubble. We didn't find anything in it. So yeah.
So is this what was over the children's room, that section of it, or?
Well, this was,
Under the window?
I don't know whose room it was. It was if you're looking at the back of the house, it'd be the right window, the second floor right window, facing the rear of the house. It would be the northwest second floor window.
Children's room.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
They were busy.
probably somebody throwing stuff in the trap. That later, there was a lot, there were
After she
3
wrote
generations
the
of plaster
window.
repairs in that one corridor. So it's really interesting that the rest of the room really survived well. It's just that one sort of corner got a lot of plaster repairs for some reason. Below the window and then just adjacent to the window. And beside the window, there was actually another generation of plaster repair. And we could see it in the layers of plaster bricks as they fell, as they put the plaster. And if we plaster the house, if that is able to happen in the subsequent restoration over the next 6 or 8 months, you come and I'll show you what that looks like, because there's a lot of waste in plaster. It just is. Anything else?
I like the idea that the carpenter stuck that coin in there.
I like it too.
Might be naive.
Yeah, I just wish I could say I
believe that, but
felt like that was it.
yeah, I think we should continue that. And put some coins in the wall to keep you over.
Yeah. Just put the right date in there. Yeah, so I wish they did do more of that so we know. But all in all, the repair process is going along very well, and we should be wrapping that up, hopefully this week, maybe the next. So, speaking of that, if we head over, you can kind of see, we'll be on time.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank y'all.